You only care about yourself, Allison. If you do not wire that money to DeAndre by Friday, do not bother coming to Thanksgiving. You are dead to me. My mother Patricia screamed those words so loudly that the speaker on my phone vibrated against the granite countertop. I am Allison, 34 years old and a corporate fraud investigator. For 5 long years, I secretly funded my younger sister Brittany and her lavish lifestyle. But that night, I did not argue or cry. I simply hung up the phone, logged into my banking portal, and canceled the $4,200 in monthly auto payments that were keeping her fake empire afloat. Then I made dinner and waited for the inevitable crash. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off entitled family members who treated you like a personal automated teller machine. The breaking point did not happen overnight. It started with a phone call on a random Tuesday evening. I had just walked into my condo after a grueling 10-hour shift, auditing a corrupt logistics company, when my phone rang. It was my mother, Patricia. She did not ask how my day was or if I had eaten dinner. She immediately launched into a frantic, high-pitched pitch about my brother-in-law, DeAndre. According to my mother, DeAndre was on the verge of securing a massive commercial real estate contract for his boutique consulting firm. The catch was that he needed $50,000 as a seed investment to secure a premium office space downtown to impress his prospective clients. My mother demanded that I liquidate my 401k retirement account to provide the funds. I stood in my kitchen staring blankly at the wall, unable to process the sheer audacity of her request. I asked her if she understood the financial penalties of cashing out a retirement fund early. I explained that I would lose thousands of dollars in taxes and early withdrawal fees just to hand cash over to a man who had not shown a single dollar of legitimate profit in 2 years. My mother scoffed, telling me that I was being deeply selfish and that family always invests in family. That was when I felt a cold shift in my chest. The kind of shift that happens when you finally see a scam for exactly what it is. I opened my laptop and pulled up my personal budget spreadsheet. I told my mother that I was already investing in their family to the exact tune of $4,200 every single month. I read the line items out loud to her so she could hear the reality of the situation. $2,400 for the lease on their luxury downtown loft because DeAndre insisted they needed a prestigious address for his image. $800 for the lease on the Mercedes-Benz sport utility vehicle because Brittany claimed an influencer could not be seen driving a basic sedan. $1,000 minimum to pay off the platinum credit card I gave them for emergencies, which they routinely maxed out at high-end steakhouses, designer boutiques, and luxury fitness studios. My mother fell silent for a fraction of a second before her gaslighting kicked into overdrive. She told me I made a mid-six-figure salary and had no husband or children, so it was my absolute duty to support my sister. She said I was hoarding wealth while Brittany was trying to build a legacy. When I calmly stated that I would not give DeAndre a single dime and that I wanted my credit card handed back to me by morning, the explosion came. She delivered her final threat, telling me I only cared about myself and that I was dead to her if I did not comply. I reached out and pressed the red button to end the call. The silence in my apartment was deafening, but it was a peaceful silence. As a corporate fraud investigator, my entire career is built on identifying parasitic financial behavior and surgically removing it. I sat down at my kitchen island and logged into my banking portal. I did not shed a single tear. This was not an emotional breakdown, it was a data execution. I navigated to the Scheduled Transfers tab. The first item on the screen was the rent payment for the downtown loft scheduled to draft in exactly 4 days. I clicked the settings icon, selected Cancel Recurring Payment, and confirmed. The line item vanished into the digital void. Next, I moved to the auto finance portal for the Mercedes-Benz. The payment was scheduled for the 5th of the month. I hit delete and watched the green confirmation banner flash across the screen. Finally, I opened the credit card management dashboard. I clicked on the Authorized Users tab, found my sister Brittany and her name, and selected the option to permanently revoke access and freeze the card. The system asked for a reason, and I simply typed account holder request. Within 7 minutes, I had completely severed the financial arteries that connected my hard-earned money to their entitled existence. I closed my laptop, walked into the kitchen, and started boiling water for pasta. The 10 days that followed were a masterclass in psychological tension. I woke up the next morning expecting an onslaught of angry text messages and voicemails, but my phone was completely clear. My mother was giving me the silent treatment, fully expecting me to crack under the weight of her disapproval and come crawling back with a tearful apology and a massive wire transfer. She had absolutely no idea that the financial life support had already been unplugged and the monitors were flatlining. On the first day of silence, I opened social media and checked my sister Brittany and her daily updates. She posted a video from a high-end day spa showing off a pristine massage table covered in pink rose petals. Soft ambient music played in the background, while the text overlay read "Self-Care Sunday" because my husband knows how to treat his queen. I knew that specific spa package cost at least $350. Since my credit card was frozen, I instantly deduced the logistics of the transaction. She had used my mother Patricia and her emergency credit card. My mother was happily floating the charge, assuming she could bully me into paying off the balance before her billing cycle ended at the end of the month. I smiled at the screen, knowing my mother was walking blindly into a trap of her own making. By day 3, the invisible gears of the American banking system began to turn. In the United States, the financial system runs entirely on the illusion of immediate money. When rent is due on the first of the month, the property management software automatically requests the funds from the linked bank account through an automated clearinghouse transaction. The bank receives the request, processes it as a pending transaction, and then takes a full 3 to 5 business days to send back a hard decline for canceled authorization. While those digital requests were bouncing back and forth across the banking servers, Brittany was busy posting highly edited photos of herself, standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows in her luxury loft. She was holding a glass of expensive champagne and captioning the photo, "Building our empire one view at a time." She was completely oblivious to the fact that her landlord and the automated accounting system were currently flagging her unit. The software was quietly removing her payment from the ledger and generating a brightly colored notice to quit for non-payment of rent, which was sitting in a print queue waiting to be taped to her solid oak front door. Day 6 arrived, bringing with it the universal due date for premium car leases. DeAndre had chosen Mercedes-Benz Financial Services to finance his image, and they are a highly efficient corporate machine. They expect their $800 on the 5th of the month without exception. However, the law requires them to offer a standard 10-day grace period before they report the late payment to the credit bureaus or initiate the asset recovery process. That evening, Brittany posted a video from the passenger seat of the Mercedes. The panoramic sunroof was wide open, the city lights were reflecting off the pristine white leather interior, and DeAndre was driving with one hand on the steering wheel while showing off a brand new designer watch that easily cost $3,000. They were heading to an exclusive downtown steakhouse to celebrate a fake business milestone. I watched the video with a sense of clinical detachment. They were burning through borrowed time and borrowed money. The grace period clock on the Mercedes was ticking down minute by minute. Every single mile they drove in that vehicle was a mile closer to a devastating public collision with the collections department. The internal discipline required to sit in that silence was immense. Day 8 and Day 9 dragged on with the same eerie quiet. I went to my office, audited financial statements for my corporate clients, and returned to my peaceful condo. I did not reach out to my mother to explain myself, and she did not reach out to me to apologize. They were living in a temporary bubble of denial, assuming the world would simply continue to fund their delusions. But as Day 10 finally drew to a close, the digital grace periods across the city officially expired. The system no longer offered any leniency. The late fees were automatically applied to their ledgers with heavy interest. The automated phone dialing systems at the banks were pulling DeAndre and his contact information into the active queue for the very next morning. The 10 days of silence were officially over. The protective shield I had provided for 5 years was gone, and tomorrow the collection calls would begin to ring. Day 11 arrived with the kind of crisp, clear morning that almost felt mocking compared to the financial hurricane that was about to make landfall across town. I woke up at exactly 6:30. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city slowly come to life. I felt a profound sense of calm. I knew exactly what today was. The 10-day grace period for the Mercedes-Benz lease had officially expired at the stroke of midnight. The corporate accounting software at the auto finance company had run its nightly batch processing, updating ledgers across the country. It had flagged DeAndre and his account as severely delinquent and moved his file from the standard billing department over to the active collections queue. In the world of corporate finance, there is no emotion. There is only the algorithm. And the algorithm had just decided that my brother-in-law was a liability. At exactly 8:15 in the morning, my cell phone began to vibrate against the granite countertop. I looked down at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a toll-free 800 number. I took a slow sip of my coffee, placed the mug down, and picked up the phone. I swiped the screen to accept the call and brought the device to my ear. I did not say a word. I simply waited for the person on the other end to speak first. "Good morning." A polite but firm voice came through the speaker. "This is a highly recorded line for quality and training purposes. Am I speaking with Allison?" I kept my breathing perfectly steady. "Speaking." I replied, my voice completely neutral. "Thank you, Allison." The representative continued. "I am calling from Mercedes-Benz Financial Services. We are contacting you because you are listed as the primary billing contact on a lease agreement for a 2023 premium sport utility vehicle registered to a Mr. DeAndre. We have not received the monthly payment of $800, which was due on the 5th of the month. The account is now past the 10-day grace period, and a late fee has been assessed. We need to secure a payment today to prevent the account from moving into the asset recovery phase. Asset recovery phase. That was the polite corporate term for sending a tow truck to repossess the car. I stood there listening to the representative read from her script. For 5 years, I had lived in constant fear of these types of phone calls. I had scrambled to move money between accounts to protect my family from the consequences of their own actions. But today, the fear was completely gone. "I am sorry," I said, my voice sounding pleasantly confused. "I think you have the wrong number." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. The representative sounded slightly taken aback. "I apologize. Is this not Allison? You are listed as the primary funding source on the automated clearinghouse profile for this account. I have absolutely no financial association with anyone named DeAndre or any vehicle leased through your company," I replied, maintaining my icy calm demeanor. "Any payment information you have on file for me is no longer valid. You will need to contact the registered owner of the vehicle directly. Please remove my number from your call list. Have a wonderful day." I lowered the phone and tapped the end call button before the representative could utter another word. I set the phone back down on the counter. The first domino had officially fallen. It took exactly 14 minutes for the reality of the situation to hit my sister and my mother. At 8:29, my phone lit up with a text message from Brittany. It read, "Allison, why did the leasing office just email me a notice to quit? Why is my rent portal showing a late fee of $200? Fix this right now." Before I could even process the audacity of her demand, the screen flashed again. This time it was a text from my mother, Patricia. "Allison, answer your sister. Her landlord just threatened her with eviction because your payment bounced. What is wrong with your bank account? Call the bank immediately and wire her the money." The notifications began to pour in like a cascading waterfall. The phone vibrated continuously, dancing across the granite countertop. 8:32. Brittany texted again. "DeAndre just got an email from Mercedes. They are saying the car is in default. What did you do?" 8:35. My mother sent a rapid-fire series of messages. Allison, pick up the phone. You are ruining your sister and her life. You are doing this on purpose. You are a vindictive and jealous person. Wire the money right now or I'm driving over to your office. 8:40. A text from DeAndre arrived. Listen to me very carefully, Allison. You are messing with my business. You are messing with my image. You better fix whatever glitch is happening with your account before I lose my mind. They were all panicking. The illusion of their wealth had shattered in a matter of minutes, and they were desperately trying to bully me into putting the pieces back together. They did not want to admit that they were broke. They wanted to believe that this was just a banking error, a minor inconvenience that their personal automated teller machine would quickly resolve. I did not reply to any of the text messages. I did not answer any of the 6 incoming phone calls. Instead, I walked over to my home office and opened my laptop. I pulled up my financial auditing software and opened a new blank spreadsheet. I was a corporate fraud investigator. I communicated through data, not through emotional outbursts. I typed in the header for the document, 5-year financial summary. I began to populate the rows with the precise figures I had memorized over the years. Line item 1 was the downtown luxury loft. $2,400 a month multiplied by 60 months. Total cost $144,000. Line item 2 was the Mercedes-Benz lease. $800 a month multiplied by 60 months. Total cost $48,000. Line item 3 was the Platinum credit card. $1,000 a month on average multiplied by 60 months. Total cost $60,000. I added a bottom border to the cells and used the auto sum function to calculate the grand total. The number sat at the bottom of the screen in bold black font, $252,000. That was the exact price of my family loyalty. $250,000 handed over to fund a fake lifestyle for people who did not even have the basic decency to say thank you. They had taken my hard-earned money and used it to fuel their own arrogance while actively diminishing my worth. I highlighted the spreadsheet and exported it as a pristine portable document format file. I saved it to my desktop and then transferred it to my phone. My phone was still buzzing relentlessly with demands and threats. My mother was now leaving voicemails accusing me of financial abuse. I opened the group text message thread that contained my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. I attached the spreadsheet file to the chat box. Underneath the attachment, I typed out a single sentence. I made sure every word was deliberate and clear. Over the past 5 years, I have spent $252,000 funding your lifestyle, and in return, you demanded my retirement savings and called me selfish. The Bank of Allison is now permanently closed. Do not contact me again. I took one final look at the message. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I pressed send. I watched the small progress bar shoot across the screen as the file and the message delivered to all 3 of their phones simultaneously. I did not wait for their replies. I immediately went into my phone settings and blocked my mother, Patricia. I blocked my sister, Brittany. I blocked my brother-in-law, DeAndre. The endless stream of notifications instantly stopped. The phone went completely dark and silent. I stood alone in my apartment, taking in the deep, satisfying quiet. The financial severing was complete. They were entirely on their own now, forced to navigate the real world without my safety net. The collision course with collections had begun, and I was finally free. 3 full weeks had passed since the day I severed the financial cord. 21 days of absolute silence from my family. In the world of corporate finance and asset recovery, 3 weeks is a highly significant milestone. It is the exact amount of time it takes for a delinquent account to move from the automated warning phase into the physical recovery phase. The banking system is incredibly patient, but it is also completely unforgiving. They do not care about your social media presence or the image you are trying to project to your friends. They only care about the contract you signed and the money you owe. DeAndre had built his entire identity around the illusion of success. He called himself a boutique business consultant, but in reality, he was just a man playing dress-up, using my money to buy his costumes. His favorite prop in this elaborate theatrical production was the pristine white Mercedes-Benz sport utility vehicle. It was the physical manifestation of his fake wealth. And on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, that physical manifestation was scheduled for a sudden and highly public departure. I was sitting at my desk in my office reviewing a complex forensic audit when my desk phone began to ring. I did not recognize the number on the caller identification display. It was a local landline registered to the Oak Ridge Country Club. It was an incredibly exclusive golf course located in the wealthiest suburb of the city. I picked up the receiver and brought it to my ear, offering a standard professional greeting. "Allison, you completely ruined my life." The voice on the other end of the line was DeAndre. He was not just angry, he was absolutely unhinged. His voice was shaking with a mixture of pure rage and profound humiliation. He was breathing heavily as if he had just sprinted across a parking lot. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and kept my voice perfectly level. "Hello, DeAndre. I assume you are calling from the clubhouse phone because your cell phone service was finally suspended. How can I help you today?" "Do not play games with me, Allison," he screamed, the sound echoing slightly in whatever empty room he was hiding in. "I am standing here with two massive potential investors. These guys were about to write me a check for my new consulting expansion. We just finished 18 holes of golf." We walked out to the valet stand, and there is a massive yellow tow truck backing up to my car. The driver is hooking up the hydraulic lift in front of the entire country club. Everyone is staring at me. The valet is looking at me like I am a criminal. "You need to call the bank right now and give them your routing number. Tell them it was a clerical error. Pay the balance immediately so this guy drops my car." I listened to his frantic demands with complete clinical detachment. I could perfectly picture the scene unfolding miles away. The pristine circular driveway of the country club, the wealthy members in their pastel golf shirts turning their heads to watch the commotion, the loud mechanical hum of the tow truck lowering its steel arms under the tires of the luxury vehicle. It was a masterclass in public humiliation, and it was entirely of his own making. "I am not calling anyone, DeAndre." I replied, my words crisp and deliberate. "And no one is dropping that car. You are currently experiencing the physical consequences of a defaulted lease agreement. When you fail to make your payment by the 5th of the month and ignore the 10-day grace period, the finance company exercises their legal right to reclaim their depreciating asset. The tow truck driver has a legally binding repossession order. If you try to stop him, he will simply call the local police." "You set me up!" he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "You knew I had this meeting today. You did this on purpose to destroy my business. I am losing a $100,000 deal because of your petty jealousy. You are a vindictive and bitter woman." I took a slow, deep breath. I let his insults wash over me without absorbing a single drop of his toxic energy. It was time to shatter the last remaining mirror in his funhouse of financial delusions. "You are not losing a deal, DeAndre," I said, my tone dropping to a quiet, deadly whisper. "You cannot lose something that never existed in the first place. I am a forensic auditor. I follow the money for a living. Before I canceled my automatic payments 3 weeks ago, I ran a full background check on your so-called boutique consulting firm. I pulled the public filings. I reviewed the state tax board registry." There was a sudden heavy silence on his end of the line. The screaming stopped, replaced by the sound of his ragged breathing. "You have not generated a single dollar of legitimate business revenue in 24 months. I continued, laying out the facts with surgical precision. "Your business license expired over a year ago. You do not have any active clients. The men you are playing golf with today are not investors. They are just wealthy marks you are trying to scam into funding your lifestyle because your primary funding source, namely me, has officially closed her doors. You are a complete fraud, DeAndre. You have been playing a game of financial pretend, and the music has finally stopped." He stammered, trying to find the words to defend himself, but the truth had completely cornered him. "You cannot leave me stranded out here, Allison," he pleaded, his voice shifting from rage to pathetic begging. "It is a 30-mile drive back to the city. I do not have a car. I do not have any money to pay for an expensive rideshare service. How am I supposed to get home? That sounds like a logistical problem for a brilliant entrepreneur to solve. I replied without a single ounce of sympathy. Perhaps you can ask your investors for a ride. Or perhaps you can call my sister and ask her to pick you up in a taxi. Oh wait, she does not have any money either. Allison, please, he begged. I suggest you step away from the window, DeAndre. I said, my voice turning ice cold. Watching your fake life get towed down the street is only going to make you feel worse. Do not ever call my office again. I placed the receiver back onto the base of the phone, cutting the connection immediately. I turned my attention back to my dual monitors and the complex financial audit waiting on my screen. My heart rate had not elevated a single beat. Miles away, at an exclusive country club, a fraud was standing in the parking lot, watching his entire identity roll away on the back of a flatbed truck. The repossession was complete, and the house of cards was rapidly accelerating toward the ground. It was 11:30 on a Thursday night. I was sitting in my living room wearing my favorite fleece robe surrounded by the quiet hum of the city far below. My laptop was resting on my knees, displaying a complex web of shell companies I was auditing for a corporate client. I specifically chose my building because it offered a premium level of security. We had a 24/7 concierge key fob access to the elevators and a strict guest policy. It was a fortress designed to keep the chaos of the outside world completely at bay. But toxic family members have a unique talent for breaching even the most secure fortresses. The sudden sharp buzz of my front door intercom shattered the silence. I jumped slightly, my heart doing a rapid double beat. My concierge always called my cell phone before sending anyone up. I set my laptop on the coffee table and walked over to the security panel mounted on the wall. I pressed the camera button. The small screen flickered to life, revealing the brightly lit hallway. Standing right outside my heavy oak door were my mother Patricia and my sister Brittany. They looked entirely out of place. Brittany was wearing designer sweatpants and large dark sunglasses indoors while clutching a massive luxury tote bag. My mother looked frantic, her hair slightly disheveled, and her jaw set in a tight, angry line. I stared at the screen, trying to comprehend how they had bypassed the front desk. I later learned they had waited in the shadows of the parking garage and slipped through the security doors directly behind one of my neighbors before riding the elevator up unannounced. They were treating my secure residence like a public park. My first instinct was to ignore them. But then my mother raised her fist and began pounding on the door. The sound echoed loudly down the pristine hallway. I knew my neighbors were wealthy professionals who valued their peace and quiet. If I let my mother throw a tantrum in the corridor building, management would be involved by morning. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door, leaving the heavy brass security chain firmly engaged. The door cracked open just 3 inches. Before I could even say a word, my mother shoved a crumpled stack of papers through the narrow gap, aggressively waving them in my face. "Sign this right now, Allison," she demanded, her voice a harsh, loud whisper. "You have had your little power trip for 3 weeks and now it is over. You are going to sign this paper and you are going to fix the absolute disaster you created." I looked down at the documents protruding through the crack in the door. I recognized the formatting immediately. It was a residential lease guarantor application. "What exactly are you trying to hand me, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat and quiet, hoping my calm demeanor would force her to lower her volume. Brittany pushed her way in front of my mother. She pulled down her sunglasses, revealing red, puffy eyes. "I am being formally evicted, Allison." She whined, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and self-pity. "The leasing office posted a public notice on my door. My neighbors saw it. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? DeAndre and I found a new luxury townhome, but because of the eviction on our record, the new landlord wants a guarantor with an 800 credit score. You have to co-sign the new lease for us tonight so we can move our things tomorrow morning." I stared at my sister through the 3-inch gap. The sheer entitlement was almost breathtaking. They were standing outside my door at midnight, demanding that I legally attach my pristine financial reputation to their sinking ship. I am not signing a guarantor application for you, Brittany, I said clearly and slowly. If I co-sign your lease, I become legally responsible for the entire debt the moment you default. And since you do not have any actual income, you will default on the first day. I am not putting my credit score on the line to subsidize another luxury home you cannot afford. You need to look for a cheap apartment that accepts tenants with poor credit. My mother slammed her hand against the door, trying to force it open, but the brass chain held strong. You will sign this paper, Allison. She hissed, her face contorting with rage. You owe us. You owe this family. You sit in this high-rise castle judging us while your sister is about to be homeless. You have always been a selfish, ungrateful child. I am not a child, Mom, I replied. I am a 34-year-old fraud investigator. I know exactly what a guarantor contract entails, and I am rejecting your application. Please leave my hallway before I call building security and have you both escorted out for trespassing. I moved to close the door, but my mother wedged her designer shoe into the gap, preventing it from shutting. She leaned in close, her eyes wide and dark. The mask of the loving mother completely melted away, leaving behind something cold and deeply manipulative. You think you are so smart with your spreadsheets and your bank accounts? My mother snarled, her voice dripping with venom. You think this money is yours. You think you earned all of this by yourself. Let me tell you a little secret about your precious financial independence, Allison. You owe me every single cent you have. I stopped trying to push the door closed. I looked at her, waiting. Do you remember when you were 12 years old and you spent a month in the hospital with that severe bone infection? My mother asked, her tone dripping with toxic triumph. Do you remember those massive medical bills the insurance refused to cover? You thought I worked extra shifts to pay for those treatments? I did not. I paid for your hospital stay by completely liquidating your father and his life insurance policy. The hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees in temperature. My father had passed away when I was 10 years old. He was a cautious, practical man who wanted to make sure I would always be taken care of. He left that policy in a trust specifically for your college education. My mother continued, a cruel smile spreading across her face. He wanted it protected. But when the hospital bills piled up, I realized I had the legal authority as your guardian to access the funds. I drained the entire account, Allison. Every last dollar. I used your father and his money to save your life. So do not stand there and lecture me about financial boundaries. I bought your health with your own inheritance. You owe me your life. You owe your sister whatever she needs. Sign the paper. I stood frozen behind the heavy wooden door, processing the magnitude of her confession. For over 2 decades, I believed my mother had sacrificed her own comfort to care for me when I was sick. I had carried a deep, underlying guilt feeling like a burden to her. That guilt was the very foundation of why I had allowed her to bleed me dry for the last 5 years. I thought I was paying off an emotional debt, but the truth was far more sinister. She had not sacrificed anything. She had stolen the only thing my father had left behind to protect my future. She had used my own money to pay my medical bills, and then she had spent the next 20 years holding it over my head, demanding endless repayment for a sacrifice she never actually made. She had weaponized my childhood illness to turn me into her personal automated teller machine. My analytical mind took over. The shock faded away instantly, replaced by a brilliant, blinding clarity. The final tether of family loyalty simply snapped and evaporated. You stole my trust fund, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. You embezzled my inheritance, and then you spent my entire adult life making me pay you back for it. It was not embezzling. She snapped defensively, pulling her foot back slightly. It was taking care of the family, and now it is your turn to take care of Brittany. I looked at my mother and then at my sister, who was staring at the floor, completely silent. The bank of Allison is permanently closed, I said. And if you ever step foot on this property again, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. Before she could react, I kicked her shoe out of the door frame, slammed the heavy oak door shut, and locked the deadbolt. I could hear my mother screaming obscenities through the thick wood, but I did not care. I walked over to the intercom and pressed the button for the front desk, instructing the night manager to send security to the 14th floor immediately. I walked back into my living room, picked up my laptop, and sat back down on the sofa. I had just lost a mother, but I had finally reclaimed my entire life. 7 days had passed since I slammed my heavy oak door in my mother and her face. A full week of absolute, uninterrupted peace. I had hired a locksmith the very next morning to upgrade my locks, just in case they tried to manipulate the building management, but no one came. I spent my days analyzing corporate ledgers and my evenings enjoying the quiet sanctuary of my home. The weather outside had turned crisp and cold, perfectly matching the new boundaries I had set. I genuinely believed the worst was over. I thought my mother revealing her theft of my inheritance was the ultimate climax of our family drama. I assumed they were currently scrambling to find a cheap apartment and a used car. I underestimated their desperation. I underestimated the sheer criminal audacity of a man who was used to living a luxury lifestyle on someone else and their dime. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen island with my dual monitors powered up, reviewing a highly sensitive forensic audit for a technology startup. My cell phone was resting on a wireless charging pad next to my coffee mug. At exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, the screen lit up with a bright push notification. It was not a text message or a missed call. It was an alert from my credit monitoring service. As a financial professional, I maintain the highest tier of credit protection available. I pay a premium subscription to have my Social Security number and my credit profile monitored 24 hours a day across all 3 major credit bureaus. I picked up the phone and tapped the notification. The facial recognition software scanned my face and unlocked the secure application. The screen transitioned from a loading symbol to a bright red warning banner. The text across the top of the screen read, "New account opened." I tapped the banner to expand the details. My eyes scanned the digital text, reading the data points with a growing sense of disbelief. The alert indicated that a new commercial business loan had just been successfully originated and attached to my Social Security number. The issuing institution was a mid-sized regional bank known for processing high-risk small business loans. I scrolled down to look at the principal amount. I expected to see a few $1,000s, maybe a desperate attempt to secure a quick personal loan to cover a security deposit on a new apartment. Instead, the number staring back at me was staggering. $150,000. The loan term was set for 60 months with a variable interest rate. The listed business address on the application was the exact same address as the downtown luxury loft from which my sister and DeAndre were currently being evicted. I set the phone down on the granite countertop. The kitchen was completely silent, but my ears were ringing. $150,000. This was not a misunderstood credit card charge or a late car payment. This was federal identity theft. This was a felony punishable by up to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. I stood up from my bar stool and paced across the hardwood floor. My mind raced backward, connecting the dots of the past week. During the midnight ambush, my mother had proudly confessed that she possessed my Social Security number from when she drained my late father and his life insurance policy. She had memorized those 9 digits, and when DeAndre realized he was losing his Mercedes, his luxury apartment, and his entire fake public image, he had convinced my mother to hand over my identity. They had crossed the line from toxic family entitlement to organized financial crime. They actually believed they could forge my signature bypass commercial underwriting protocols and steal $150,000 without me noticing. To secure a commercial loan of that magnitude without collateral requires an extensive paper trail. DeAndre could not have simply filled out a single online form. He must have submitted forged tax returns, fabricated profit and loss statements, and a fraudulent business plan, all bearing my forged signature and my Social Security number. The level of premeditation required for this crime was staggering. This was not a crime of opportunity or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated, multi-day conspiracy orchestrated by my own family. My mother, Patricia, had actively participated in a scheme to saddle me with massive corporate debt, just so her golden child and her fraudulent husband could maintain their illusion of wealth. For exactly 3 minutes, I allowed myself to feel the profound weight of the betrayal. I let the shock and the anger wash over me. I thought about the sheer malice required for a mother to steal her own daughter and her identity to fund a fraudulent business for her son-in-law. I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of grief and rage. But at the 3-minute mark, I forced myself to stop pacing. I took a deep breath, held it for 5 seconds, and slowly exhaled. I walked over to the kitchen sink and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up at my reflection in the mirror above the sink, the heartbroken daughter was gone. She had been permanently dismissed. The person staring back at me was Allison, the senior corporate fraud investigator. My emotions evaporated entirely, replaced by cold, hard logic and an insatiable appetite for forensic evidence. I walked back to my kitchen island and sat down in front of my dual monitors. I minimized the technology startup audit and opened a new encrypted digital workspace. I titled the new folder Operation DeAndre. I was no longer dealing with annoying family members. I was dealing with suspects in a federal wire fraud investigation. When amateur criminals commit identity theft, they always leave a massive digital footprint. They do not understand Internet protocol addresses, device identifiers, or digital signature timestamps. They think a fake signature on a portable document format file is enough to fool the banking system. They have no idea how deep the forensic rabbit hole goes, and I was about to show them. I picked up my phone and opened the credit monitoring application once more. I needed to act quickly, but I could not let them know I was watching. If I called them and screamed, they would panic and try to destroy the evidence. I needed to let them feel victorious. I needed to let them believe their brilliant scheme had worked flawlessly, so they would continue to make mistakes. I navigated to the origination details of the fraudulent loan to review the funding status. The funds had not been dispersed yet. In commercial banking, there is always a mandatory holding period between the approval of a loan and the actual wire transfer of the cash. The regional bank had approved the credit application, but the $150,000 was likely sitting in an escrow account, waiting for final verification before being released to DeAndre and his fake consulting firm. They were probably celebrating right now, popping cheap champagne in their apartment surrounded by moving boxes, thinking they had secured the ultimate payday. They thought they had finally outsmarted me. I began to map out my strategy. I needed to contact the fraud department of the regional bank directly, but I needed to do it without triggering an automated notification to the applicant. I needed to gather the digital fingerprints from the loan application before DeAndre could cover his tracks. The trap had been set by them, but I was about to completely reconfigure the wiring. They thought they had found a loophole to steal my money and save their fake empire. Instead, they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to send them to federal prison. The 10 days of silence were over, and the professional investigation had officially begun. I stared at the red alert banner on my phone for a long time. The temptation to pick up the device and dial my mother was incredibly strong. I wanted to scream into the receiver to demand how she could betray her own daughter to such a devastating degree. I wanted to hear the panic in her voice when she realized she had been caught. But the investigator inside me knew that confronting a criminal, while the crime is still in progress, is the most foolish thing you can possibly do. When you confront a fraudster prematurely, you give them the most valuable asset in the world. You give them time to delete files, time to destroy hard drives, and time to coordinate their lies. I was not going to give DeAndre a single second of advantage. I opened my laptop and navigated directly to the official websites of the 3 major credit reporting agencies. I went straight to the secure portals used strictly for identity theft victims. I logged into my profile at the first agency, bypassed the standard security alerts, and selected the option for a permanent hard credit freeze. A hard freeze is a highly restrictive measure designed to stop criminals dead in their tracks. It essentially locks your credit report in a digital vault. If any financial institution attempts to pull your credit history to approve a loan, open a credit card, or establish a line of credit, the request is automatically rejected at the server level. It does not matter if the applicant has your social security number, your date of birth, and your mother and her maiden name. Without the unique personal identification number that I was currently generating, no one was getting access to my financial reputation. I repeated the exact same process with the other two bureaus. Within 15 minutes, my financial identity was completely sealed. The $150,000 commercial loan had already been approved. But if DeAndre tried to open a checking account to receive those funds, or if he attempted to apply for a secondary line of credit, he was going to hit an impenetrable digital brick wall. Securing my credit was only the defensive portion of my strategy. Now it was time to go on the offensive. The alert indicated that the loan had been originated through a mid-sized regional bank known as Horizon Trust. They specialized in fast-track commercial lending for small businesses. They were also a bank I was intimately familiar with. 2 years ago, I had collaborated with their internal fraud department on a massive corporate embezzlement case. I pulled up my professional contact directory and found the direct office line for the senior fraud analyst at Horizon Trust. His name was Gregory. I picked up my phone and dialed the number, keeping the conversation casual but urgent. I told him an application had just been processed through his commercial lending division using my personal credentials and that it was a highly sophisticated case of synthetic identity theft. I explained that I was preparing a formal federal report, but I needed a favor to expedite the internal investigation. I needed the back-end origination logs. In the banking industry, fraud investigators share a unique bond. We are all fighting the same endless war against criminals, and we regularly share intelligence to stop the bleeding. Gregory did not hesitate. He asked for the application reference number from my alert. I read the alphanumeric code to him over the phone. I heard his fingers rapidly clicking across his keyboard. He let out a low whistle when he saw the principal amount. He confirmed that the loan was currently in the mandatory holding status and that the funds were sitting in a secure escrow account awaiting final manual review. He told me he was flagging the file internally as confirmed fraud, which would permanently freeze the disbursement. The $150,000 was never going to reach DeAndre. Then Gregory did exactly what I needed him to do. He exported the raw technical data from the online application and sent it to my encrypted professional email address. I thanked him, disconnected the call, and opened the incoming file. This is the part of the job that amateur criminals never anticipate. When you fill out a loan application online, you are not just submitting the information you type into the digital boxes. The bank software is silently collecting dozens of technical data points about your device and your physical location. I opened the spreadsheet containing the system logs and began to scan the columns. I found the digital signature file first. The application included a digital contract complete with an electronic signature and a notary stamp. The signature was a decent forgery of my own, but the technical metadata attached to the file told the real story. I scrolled over to the Internet Protocol address column. Every device connected to the Internet is assigned a unique string of numbers that identifies its exact location on the global grid. I copied the Internet Protocol address from the application and pasted it into a geolocation tracking tool on my secondary monitor. The software mapped the coordinates and dropped a bright red pin on the screen. I stared at the map and let out a short, dry laugh. The red pin was resting directly on the exact address of the luxury downtown loft that my sister and DeAndre were currently leasing. The same loft they were actively being evicted from due to non-payment of rent. DeAndre had not used a secure virtual private network to mask his location. He had not gone to a public coffee shop to use their free wireless internet. He had not even bothered to purchase an untraceable burner computer. This self-proclaimed brilliant business consultant had sat on his expensive designer sofa, connected his personal laptop to his own home wireless network, and committed a massive federal felony. He had practically left a digital trail of breadcrumbs leading federal agents directly to his front door. He had even used a standard web browser that logged the unique media access control address of his specific laptop. I had the absolute, undeniable proof that the application originated from his physical residence. The trap was now fully constructed and armed. The bank account holding the stolen funds was permanently frozen by the fraud department. My personal credit profile was locked behind a digital fortress, preventing any further damage. and I was holding a comprehensive forensic dossier that definitively linked DeAndre to the crime scene. They had absolutely no idea that their massive payday had already been intercepted and neutralized before it even began. They were probably busy packing their luxury bags and planning how to spend my money, thinking they had secured their future. I decided to let them keep dreaming for a little while longer. The upcoming Thanksgiving holiday was just around the corner. I knew they were going to use the family gathering to gloat and project their fake success. I was going to let them walk right into that dining room thinking they had won. I was going to sit across the table from them, smile, and watch them try to play their roles. They wanted to treat me like a vulnerable target, but they were about to learn exactly why you never try to steal the identity of a woman who builds financial cages for a living. Thanksgiving has always been a battleground in my family, but this year the battlefield had relocated. Since Brittany and DeAndre had officially been locked out of their luxury downtown loft, they were forced to host the holiday dinner at a short-term rental property. They had rented a large modern house in the suburbs, claiming it was just a temporary transition while they closed on a massive new estate. I arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, holding a bottle of sparkling apple cider. I walked up the driveway, observing the rental car parked out front, since the Mercedes had been repossessed. When I stepped through the front door, the smell of roasted turkey and expensive sage stuffing filled the air. They had clearly hired a private catering company to prepare the meal. I placed my coat on a chair and walked into the living room, where my extended family was already gathered. The atmosphere in this room was thick with artificial superiority. Brittany was wearing a brand new designer cashmere sweater and holding a crystal glass of expensive red wine. DeAndre was standing by the fireplace holding court with two of my uncles, bragging loudly about a massive capital injection his consulting firm had just secured. My mother, Patricia, was buzzing around the room, smiling brightly and topping off everyone and their drinks. If you did not know the truth, you would think you were looking at the most successful family in the country. But I knew the truth. I knew the new sweater, the catered food, and the rental house were all being funded by the last remaining scraps of credit they could scrape together. They were putting on this extravagant show because they truly believed that $150,000 was going to land in their bank account on Monday morning. They thought they had successfully stolen my identity and outsmarted the system. My mother spotted me near the entryway and her fake smile tightened. She walked over and loudly announced my arrival to the entire room, ensuring all eyes were on me. "Look, everyone!" Allison finally decided to join us. She said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I am so glad you could take a break from your little spreadsheets to spend time with people who actually have a life." A few of my aunts chuckled awkwardly. I simply smiled and said, "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." I walked over to the kitchen island and poured myself a glass of water. Brittany sauntered over, leaning heavily against the marble counter. She looked me up and down with an expression of deep pity. "You look exhausted, Allison," she said, sighing dramatically. "You really need to stop working so hard for that corporate machine. DeAndre and I were just saying how sad it is that you spend all your time alone in that condo. You should let my husband give you some advice on how to build passive income so you can actually enjoy your life." I took a slow sip of my water. I could feel the heavy leather strap of my purse resting against my hip. Inside that purse, neatly organized in a manila folder, was a stack of printed system logs from the regional bank. The documents contained the exact internet protocol address, proving DeAndre had committed federal wire fraud from his own living room. I was holding the literal key to their absolute destruction, but I kept my face entirely blank. "I need to focus on my career right now," I replied, making my voice sound meek and slightly defeated. "Not everyone is as lucky as you two." DeAndre heard this and let out a booming laugh from across the room. "Luck has nothing to do with it, Allison," he boasted loudly for the uncles to hear. "It is about having a winner mindset. When you think big, the universe rewards you with big capital. You just do not have the vision to play in the big leagues." My mother clapped her hands together, calling everyone to the massive dining table. The caterers had laid out a stunning spread of food. As we all took our seats, my mother tapped her wineglass with a silver spoon. Before we eat, I just want to say how incredibly proud I am of Brittany and DeAndre, she announced, beaming at the golden couple. They have faced a lot of jealousy and negativity lately, but they are rising above it and building an empire. And since they were generous enough to host us in this beautiful temporary home, I think it is only fair that we all pitch in for the catering bill. She turned her head and locked eyes directly with me. Allison, since you are single and do not have a family to feed, I went ahead and put you down for $500. You can just wire that to Brittany right now before we serve the turkey. The entire table went completely silent. My aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was a classic Patricia maneuver. She was trying to publicly shame me into compliance using the pressure of the extended family to force me to open my wallet. She wanted to prove to everyone that she still had complete control over me. I looked at Brittany, who was smirking behind her wineglass. I looked at DeAndre, who was cutting a piece of bread with a smug grin on his face. They really thought they had won. They thought the bank loan was a guaranteed success, and this public humiliation was just their way of taking a final victory lap at my expense. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not pull out the folder and expose them. If I exposed them now, the extended family would just make excuses for them and tell me I was ruining a holiday. Instead, I slowly reached into my purse. I felt the crisp edge of the manila folder, but my hand moved past it. I pulled out my checkbook. I clicked my pen and wrote out a check for $500. I tore it from the booklet and slid it across the table to my mother. "Consider it my final contribution to the family business," I said softly. My mother snatched the check, looking incredibly triumphant. "See, everyone," she crowed, holding the piece of paper up. "Family always takes care of family." I picked up my fork and began to eat my dinner in perfect silence. Let them enjoy the catered turkey and the expensive wine. Let them bask in their fabricated glory. They had absolutely no idea that the check I just handed them was going to bounce, because I had already closed that account. And they had no idea that their holiday feast was the last meal they would ever eat before the federal government came knocking on their door. The catered turkey had been carved, and the crystal wine glasses were constantly being refilled by my mother, who was playing the role of the perfect high society hostess. The dining room of the rental house was filled with the sounds of clinking silverware and the low hum of superficial conversation. I sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany table, pushing a piece of roasted carrot around my plate. I was observing the room with the calculated detachment of a lead investigator watching suspects interact in an interrogation room. The tension in the air was thick, but the extended family was completely oblivious to the financial war being waged right under their noses. They were just happy to be invited to what they assumed was a mansion owned by a highly successful young couple. The pivotal moment arrived just as dessert was being served. My Uncle Robert, a retired middle manager who was easily impressed by flashy displays of wealth, leaned across the table. He pointed his silver fork directly at DeAndre and asked the question that set the entire charade into motion. So DeAndre, my uncle, began, his voice loud and booming over the background music. "Tell us about this big business expansion of yours. Patricia has been bragging all afternoon about a massive capital injection. What exactly is the next move for the consulting firm?" DeAndre straightened his posture and buttoned his expensive suit jacket. He smiled, a wide, gleaming smile that belonged on a late-night infomercial. He absolutely loved having an audience. "Well, Robert, it has been an incredible quarter for us." DeAndre started using his hands to gesture expansively as he spoke. "We have officially outgrown our current operational model. I have been in aggressive negotiations with a silent partner for the past month, and we finally closed the deal. We secured a massive round of funding that is going to allow me to secure a premium commercial office space, scale my administrative team, and aggressively pursue high-net-worth clients. It is a major paradigm shift for the business." Brittany leaned over and placed her hand on his arm, gazing at him with an expression of pure, manufactured adoration. "I am just so proud of him," she chimed in, her voice dripping with fake humility. "He works so incredibly hard, and it is finally paying off." My mother beamed from the head of the table, raising her glass of wine in a silent toast. The extended family murmured in approval, nodding their heads at the impressive corporate buzzwords DeAndre had just strung together. They had absolutely no idea that his entire business consisted of a suspended website and a repossessed luxury car. I took a slow sip of my water, carefully setting the glass down on the coaster. I looked directly at DeAndre. I made sure my expression was completely neutral, devoid of any sarcasm or anger. "That sounds like a fascinating development, DeAndre," I said, my voice soft and polite. Securing private equity in this economic climate is incredibly difficult, especially without presenting a solid 2-year profit and loss statement. Who exactly is this silent investor that believes so strongly in your vision? DeAndre looked at me, his eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second. He thought I was challenging him. He thought I was trying to embarrass him in front of the family by pointing out his lack of actual revenue. But his massive ego and his absolute belief that his fraudulent loan application had worked pushed him to make the biggest mistake of his entire life. He wanted to establish ultimate dominance over me, right there at the dinner table. He wanted to prove to everyone that he had beaten me at my own game. DeAndre let out a condescending chuckle and shook his head. "Actually, Allison, you should know better than anyone that the best investors are the ones closest to home." He stood up from his chair and walked over to a leather briefcase resting on the side console table. He snapped the brass latches open and pulled out a thick document printed on heavy legal paper. He walked back to the dining table and held the document up for the entire family to see. "This is the beauty of family wealth," he announced, his voice echoing in the large room. Allison was playing hard to get earlier this month, but she finally came to her senses. She realized that sitting on dormant assets is a terrible financial strategy. So she generously signed a comprehensive power of attorney over to me. She legally granted me full administrative access to leverage her home equity line of credit for my business expansion. My mother gasped, placing her hand over her heart, as if this was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Brittany smiled a wicked, triumphant smile directly at me. The extended family erupted into a chorus of praise. Uncle Robert clapped his hands together, calling me a brilliant, silent partner. My aunts gushed about how wonderful it was to see siblings supporting each other in business. DeAndre passed the document down the table. It moved from hand to hand as my relatives admired the legal jargon. Eventually, the thick piece of paper made its way to my end of the table. I picked it up and held it under the light of the crystal chandelier. I did not flinch. I did not scream that it was a fake. I did not stand up and accuse him of a felony. I simply activated the forensic auditor section of my brain and meticulously examined the evidence. The signature at the bottom of the page was a remarkably good forgery. It had the correct slant and the proper spacing. But that was not what caught my attention. My eyes immediately locked onto the blue ink of the official notary stamp pressed into the bottom right corner of the paper. A power of attorney document granting real estate leverage requires a legally commissioned public notary to verify the identity of the signer. I read the name printed inside the circular blue stamp. It belonged to a woman named Brenda, who I instantly recognized as one of my mother and her closest friends from her weekend tennis club. DeAndre and my mother had not just forged my signature. They had conspired with a licensed state official to commit federal bank fraud. They had dragged a third party into their criminal enterprise. I traced my finger over the raised seal of the stamp, feeling the physical indentation on the paper. The room was still buzzing with compliments and excited chatter about the future. I looked up and met DeAndre and his incredibly arrogant gaze. He gave me a slow, deliberate wink, thinking he had completely trapped me into silence. I offered him a tight, polite smile in return. I carefully folded the fraudulent power of attorney document in half and slipped it directly into my purse. I now possessed the exact physical evidence needed to secure an indictment, and I was going to let him continue digging his grave. I kept my hands gently on my lap beneath the heavy mahogany table. The dining room vibrated with the excited chatter of my extended family. They were mesmerized by the fraudulent document DeAndre had just showcased. In corporate fraud investigations, the most dangerous thing you can do is let a cornered suspect know they are trapped. If you show your hand too early, panic sets in. They will destroy documents and coordinate alibis. If I stood up and screamed about the forgery, my mother and DeAndre would immediately go into damage control. They would throw the paper in the fireplace and claim a misunderstanding. I needed to solidify the evidence, and the only way was to surrender my pride. I had to let them believe they broke me. I slowly slid my right hand into the pocket of my purse resting on the chair next to my leg. I found the smooth glass screen of my phone. Without looking, I used my thumb to press the side button. My fingers knew the exact layout of the interface. I swiped up and opened the voice memo application. I pressed the large red circle. A small vibration confirmed the recording had started. I left the phone sitting in my purse with the microphone exposed to capture the acoustics of the room. I let out a trembling sigh. I slumped my shoulders forward, allowing my posture to deflate. I looked down at my plate, avoiding eye contact. I was preparing to deliver the performance of a lifetime. DeAndre, I said, my voice soft and deliberately shaky. The entire table went quiet, turning their attention back to me. DeAndre puffed out his chest, looking down at me from the head of the table like a victorious king. Yes, Allison, he replied, his tone dripping with condescending pity. I kept my eyes focused on the tablecloth. I just want to make sure everything is handled correctly, I murmured. Since you are using my home equity line of credit to fund your business expansion, I am going to need a formal copy of that power of attorney document. My certified public accountant is extremely strict. If I do not provide the proper tax records for a transaction of this size, I could face an audit. You understand, right? It is just for my tax files. DeAndre let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the dining room walls. Oh, Allison, you and your spreadsheets, he mocked, waving his hand dismissively. You are always so worried about the technicalities. But sure, I can absolutely get you a copy. I will make sure my assistant scans it and emails it to your accountant on Monday morning. After all, we want to keep everything completely transparent between business partners. He was practically glowing with arrogance. He genuinely believed that my request for a copy was my ultimate concession. He thought I was rolling over and accepting the theft of my identity simply because I was too weak to fight back against the family dynamic. He had no idea that he had just verbally confirmed on a hidden audio recording that he was leveraging my specific home equity line of credit using a document I never legally authorized. My mother, Patricia, could not resist the opportunity to take her own victory lap. She had watched me defy her for 3 weeks. She had been locked out of my apartment and cut off from my bank account. Now she saw me sitting at the table with my head bowed, and she wanted to drive the knife in as deeply as possible. She stood up from her chair and walked around the table, stopping right behind me. She placed her hands on my shoulders, squeezing them with a tight, painful grip. "See, Allison," my mother announced to the entire room, her voice loud and triumphant. "This is what happens when you finally stop being so selfish and stubborn. Family is a team. We sink or swim together." I kept my head down, letting the microphone in my purse capture every single word of her monologue. "You should be incredibly proud of yourself today, Allison." My mother continued, her voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. "You are finally stepping up and supporting your sister and her marriage the way you always should have. I know you were angry when we took the initiative to set up the funding. But sometimes, people need a little push to do the right thing. Brittany and DeAndre needed this capital to survive. You have more than enough money sitting in your accounts doing nothing. It was incredibly selfish of you to try and keep it all to yourself while your own flesh and blood were struggling. We did what we had to do to protect this family." The words hung in the air. We did what we had to do. My mother had just explicitly admitted in front of the entire extended family that she and DeAndre had taken the initiative to access my funds against my will. She had framed their felony identity theft as a noble family intervention. She had confessed to the entire conspiracy, and my phone was currently capturing high-definition audio of her entire speech. Brittany chimed in from across the table, raising her glass of wine. "Thank you, Allison," Brittany said, her voice sickly sweet. "I know it took a lot of convincing for you to finally sign that document, but DeAndre and I are just so grateful." I slowly raised my head and looked directly into my sister and her eyes. I offered her a weak, trembling smile. "You are very welcome, Brittany," I said softly. "I really hope this business gives you exactly what you deserve." Underneath the table, my phone silently saved the audio file. They thought they had humiliated me into submission. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed me a flawless, airtight confession wrapped in a neat holiday bow. I drove back to my condominium, leaving the Thanksgiving feast and the manufactured family bliss behind me. When I walked through my front door, the silence of my apartment wrapped around me like a protective blanket. I went straight to my home office and booted up my computer. I plugged my phone into the workstation and transferred the hidden audio recording to my encrypted server. Listening to the playback of my mother and DeAndre proudly confessing to their scheme was deeply satisfying, but in the world of federal investigations, a verbal confession is just the garnish. The main course is always the paper trail. Juries can be swayed by emotional testimony, but numbers simply do not lie. It was time to build the forensic foundation that would bury them. I opened my dual monitors and initiated a deep dive into the corporate structure of DeAndre and his limited liability company. As a corporate fraud investigator, I have access to comprehensive business registries and financial databases that the general public never sees. I typed his name and his company name into the search terminal. The results populated almost instantly, and the picture they painted was a masterpiece of financial incompetence and illegal activity. He had registered his business 2 years ago using a cheap online legal service. The primary operating address was listed as the downtown luxury loft. That was his first critical mistake. When you commit commercial fraud using your primary residential address, you eliminate any plausible deniability about who is actually operating the business. I started tracing the digital breadcrumbs of his corporate banking history. A limited liability company is designed to protect a business owner from personal financial ruin. But that legal shield only exists if you maintain a strict separation between your business and personal finances. This is called the corporate veil. DeAndre had not just pierced the corporate veil, he had completely shredded it. I cross-referenced the known routing numbers from the credit card payments I used to make for them. The financial flow was a chaotic mess of commingled funds. He was treating his corporate operating account like a personal automated teller machine. There was absolutely no distinction between his fake consulting firm and his daily life. The deeper I dug into the transaction ledgers, the more the tax evasion became glaringly obvious. DeAndre had figured out a way to fund my sister Brittany and her severe luxury shopping addiction while simultaneously defrauding the Internal Revenue Service. I looked at the itemized deductions he had claimed on his public corporate filings. He had categorized tens of thousands of dollars spent at designer handbag boutiques as marketing materials and client acquisition costs. He had written off their extravagant weekend getaways as corporate team-building retreats. Those expensive dinners at high-end steakhouses were deducted as executive board meetings. He was artificially driving his corporate revenue down to absolute zero to avoid paying income tax, all while living a lavish lifestyle subsidized by my money and illegal write-offs. But the tax dodging was just the beginning. I uncovered a crude but deliberate money laundering mechanism. When DeAndre occasionally managed to secure a small fee from a local business owner, he did not simply deposit it. He moved the money through a series of digital payment applications, transferring the funds from his business account to a personal account, and then back into the business account, under the classification of a fresh capital investment. He was trying to artificially inflate his cash flow to make the company look highly profitable on paper. It was a pathetic attempt at a shell game designed to fool basic algorithmic underwriting software. He was layering the money to obscure its origin, which is the exact legal definition of money laundering. I opened a new text document and began to categorize his federal violations line by line. I was no longer looking at an annoying brother-in-law. I was looking at a walking federal indictment. I started with the most severe charge, which was wire fraud. The federal statute for wire fraud is broad and devastatingly punitive. It is defined as any scheme to defraud another person or institution using electronic communications that cross state lines. When DeAndre sat on his living room sofa and clicked submit on that commercial loan application, the data packet traveled from his internet router to the bank servers located 3 states away. That single transmission across state lines instantly triggered federal jurisdiction. I documented the counts methodically. Count 1 was the electronic transmission of the fraudulent loan application containing fabricated financial data. Count 2 was the transmission of my stolen Social Security number constituting aggravated identity theft. Count 3 was the digital submission of the forged power of attorney document complete with the fake notary stamp. Count 4 was the systemic wire fraud associated with his money laundering transfers. Each individual count of federal wire fraud carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The identity theft charge carried a mandatory consecutive 2-year sentence. I looked at the list on my screen. DeAndre was looking at decades behind bars and millions of dollars in federal restitution. I spent the next few hours printing every single piece of evidence. I printed the Internet Protocol logs, the corporate registry filings, the itemized tax deductions, and the money laundering transaction maps. I took a heavy binder from my supply closet and began placing the documents inside, separating each federal violation with a numbered tab. I placed the drive containing the audio confession into a plastic sleeve at the front. By the time the sun began to rise over the city skyline, my forensic deep dive was complete. The messy family drama had been distilled into a pristine, irrefutable legal dossier. They thought they were criminal masterminds who had found the ultimate shortcut to wealth. But as I closed the heavy cover of the evidence binder, I knew the truth. They had simply built their own financial coffin, and I had just finished hammering in every single nail. It was past 2 in the morning. The city outside my window was completely dark and silent, but inside my home office, the glow of my dual monitors illuminated the room. I had already uncovered DeAndre and his crude money laundering operation, as well as his blatant corporate tax evasion. But something in my gut told me I was only scratching the surface. When you deal with a narcissist who believes the rules do not apply to him, you have to assume his greed knows absolutely no boundaries. I decided to take my investigation one step further. I opened a secure web browser and navigated to the public database managed by the Federal Small Business Administration. During the global pandemic, the federal government launched the Paycheck Protection Program. It was designed to be a vital lifeline for struggling small businesses to keep their employees on the payroll and save the economy. But it also became a massive target for opportunistic fraudsters. I knew DeAndre loved free money, and I knew he possessed the exact type of arrogance required to try and steal from the federal government. I typed the legal name of his fake consulting firm into the federal search bar and hit enter. The database took a few seconds to process the query before a single row of data appeared on my screen. I leaned closer to the monitor. The database confirmed that DeAndre had successfully applied for and received a Paycheck Protection Program loan. I moved my cursor over to the column that displayed the principal disbursement amount. The number staring back at me was $200,000. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I scrolled to the far right of the screen to check the current status of the loan. It was marked in bright green text as fully forgiven. He had not only stolen $200,000 of taxpayer money, but he had successfully convinced the government that he used it legitimately, so he would never have to pay a single dime back. I clicked on the detailed view of his application to see exactly how he pulled off such a massive heist. The mathematics required to secure a $200,000 forgivable loan are very specific. The government calculated the loan amount based on the average monthly payroll of a company. DeAndre had stated on his official federal application that his boutique consulting firm employed 12 full-time staff members. He claimed he needed the capital to save their jobs and keep food on their tables during a global crisis. It was an absolute fabrication. I knew for a fact that his entire business consisted solely of him sitting on his living room sofa playing on his laptop. The sheer audacity of his crime was breathtaking. In order to get that application approved, he would have had to manufacture an entire fake company infrastructure. He would have needed to generate 12 fake employee profiles, complete with names, addresses, and stolen or fabricated social security numbers. He would have had to forge quarterly payroll tax documents and submit fake employee tax forms. He essentially created a dozen digital ghost employees to trick the federal underwriters. And once the $200,000 landed in his account, he did not create jobs or save livelihoods. He used the federal relief funds to lease his luxury Mercedes sport utility vehicle. He used it to pay the rent on his downtown loft. He used it to fund Brittany and her endless luxury shopping sprees and their expensive steakhouse dinners. He had literally built my sister and her entire influencer aesthetic using stolen federal funds. But the problem with stealing from the government is that the money eventually runs out. $200,000 can disappear very quickly when two people are addicted to designer brands and country club memberships. That was the missing piece of the puzzle. I finally understood exactly why they were so desperate to steal my identity this week. The pandemic relief money was completely gone. The well had run dry and the eviction notices were piling up. They needed my $150,000 commercial loan to replace the federal money they had already burned through. Defrauding a regional bank is a serious crime, but defrauding the federal government during a national crisis is an entirely different level of criminal exposure. The federal government does not forgive, and they do not forget. When federal prosecutors pursue Paycheck Protection Program fraud, they bring the full weight of the justice system down on the suspect. DeAndre was no longer just a toxic family member trying to ruin my credit score. He was a federal criminal facing decades in a penitentiary and massive financial restitution. I began to compile the ultimate master dossier. I opened a new section in my digital workspace and downloaded the official federal loan data. I highlighted the fake employee count and the massive forgiven balance in bright yellow. I sent the documents to my laser printer and listened to the rhythmic hum of the pages sliding into the tray. I took a heavy-duty black binder from my supply closet and started assembling the final product. I was building a completely bulletproof case file. I organized the evidence with absolute precision. Section 1 contained the Internet Protocol logs from the regional bank proving he originated the new fraudulent loan directly from his apartment. Section 2 held the forged power of attorney document complete with the fake notary stamp from my mother and her friend. Section 3 detailed his crude money laundering transfers and his blatant corporate tax evasion. And finally, Section 4 served as the ultimate kill shot, containing the undeniable proof of his $200,000 federal pandemic fraud. I punched holes in the crisp white paper and secured them behind the numbered tabs. I placed the digital storage drive containing the hidden audio recording of my mother and DeAndre confessing to the conspiracy right in the front pocket of the binder. When I closed the heavy cover, it made a satisfying solid thud echoing in the quiet room. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a pale morning light across my desk. I placed my hands flat on top of the binder. It was no longer just a collection of papers. It was a loaded weapon. The evidence was irrefutable, the timeline was flawless, and the trap was perfectly set. All I had to do now was hand it over to the right authorities and watch the entire fake empire crumble to dust. It was Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. The mandatory holding period for the regional bank loan had officially expired. In a normal commercial transaction, this is the exact moment the funds are released into the operating account of the borrower. For DeAndre and Brittany, this was supposed to be their moment of ultimate victory. They were likely sitting in their rental house, staring at their mobile banking application, waiting for the balance to jump from $0 to $150,000. But they were not dealing with a normal transaction. They were dealing with an account that was frozen solid by a federal fraud hold. and I had a front row seat to their impending panic. I was sitting at my desk at the corporate investigation firm sipping my morning coffee when my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen. The caller identification displayed my mother and her cell phone number. I had unblocked her over the weekend specifically so they could reach me when the trap finally snapped shut. I picked up the phone and brought it to my ear without saying a word. "Allison, you need to fix this right now." It was not my mother. It was DeAndre. His voice was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, booming tone he used at the Thanksgiving table was entirely gone. He sounded breathless, frantic, and completely unhinged. There was a loud, frantic tapping sound in the background, like someone rapidly hitting a keyboard. "Fix what, DeAndre?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured. "What exactly seems to be the problem this morning?" "Do not play stupid with me," he screamed, his voice cracking. "We just tried to wire the capital injection out of the holding account to secure our new software vendor, and the transaction was declined. The bank portal is completely locked. It says we need the primary applicant to call the fraud department to verbally authorize the transfer. You need to call them right now and tell them everything is fine. Tell them to release the wire." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair looking out the window at the morning traffic. Secure a new software vendor. I knew exactly what that meant. In the world of financial fraud, that is code for moving the stolen funds to an untraceable offshore cryptocurrency exchange. They were trying to wash the money before the regional bank realized the application was fraudulent. They thought they could steal the money and make it disappear in the blink of an eye. "I am sorry, DeAndre," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am not sure I understand. Why would the bank need me to authorize a transfer for your business account?" "Because your name is on the primary application," he yelled, desperation bleeding into every single word. "You know this, Allison. We talked about this at Thanksgiving. You gave me the power of attorney. You are the financial backer. The bank just flagged it as a large, irregular transaction. It is standard procedure. Just pick up the other line, call the 1-800 number, and tell them you authorize the release of the funds. Do it now before the vendor cancels our contract." I could hear Brittany sobbing loudly in the background. My mother was shouting something unintelligible. The entire rental house was in a state of absolute meltdown. They were watching their massive payday slip through their fingers, and they were desperately trying to bully me into opening the vault. It was time to drop the hammer. I sat forward in my chair, placing both feet flat on the floor. "I cannot authorize a loan I never signed for DeAndre," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper. The frantic tapping in the background instantly stopped. The entire line went dead silent. "What did you just say?" DeAndre asked, his voice barely a breath. "I said I cannot authorize a loan I never signed for," I repeated, speaking clearly and deliberately. "I did not sign a commercial credit application. I did not provide my social security number, and I certainly did not sign that forged power of attorney document you were waving around at Thanksgiving. The bank portal is not locked because of an irregular transaction, DeAndre. It is locked because the internal fraud department flagged your internet protocol address and confirmed the entire application is a synthetic identity theft operation." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "You set us up," DeAndre whispered, the realization finally crashing down on him. "No, DeAndre," I replied smoothly. "You set yourself up. You sat on your sofa connected to your own home wireless network and committed a federal wire fraud felony. I simply made sure the bank knew exactly where to look. Those funds are never going to be released. They are sitting in a federal escrow account, waiting to be seized as evidence. And speaking of evidence, I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving dinner. It was very generous of you and my mother to publicly confess to stealing my financial identity while my phone was recording the entire conversation." I heard a loud crash through the phone speaker, followed by Brittany screaming. It sounded like someone had just thrown a chair across the room. DeAndre began to stammer rapidly, trying to string a sentence together. "Allison, please." He begged, the arrogance completely replaced by raw terror. "You are my sister-in-law. We are family. You cannot do this to us. We will go to jail. Please just call them and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you changed your mind. We will withdraw the application." You crossed the line from family drama to federal crime the moment you forged my signature. I stated my tone, offering absolutely no mercy. The bank is not going to drop the investigation, and neither am I. I have already compiled a full forensic dossier of your activities, including your fraudulent Paycheck Protection Program loan from the pandemic. The federal government does not do misunderstandings, DeAndre. I suggest you use whatever money you have left to hire a very good criminal defense attorney. Do not ever call me again. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on my desk. My heart rate was perfectly steady. The final illusion of their control had been completely shattered. The bank lockout had triggered their panic, and my revelation had turned that panic into pure existential dread. They were officially trapped in a cage of their own making, and the authorities were already on their way. It was barely 2 hours after my phone call with DeAndre when the front desk of my corporate office building called my direct extension. My office is located on the 22nd floor of a highly secure commercial high-rise in the financial district. We handle sensitive corporate audits, so the building employs a dedicated security team and utilizes strict badge access protocols. When I picked up the receiver, the receptionist sounded incredibly stressed. She told me there was a woman in the main lobby claiming to be my mother, who was screaming at the security guards and demanding to speak with the head of our human resources department. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and grabbed a specific manila envelope I had prepared earlier that morning. I told the receptionist I would be right down. The elevator ride down to the ground floor took exactly 45 seconds. When the stainless steel doors slid open, the chaotic scene in the lobby was immediately apparent. My mother, Patricia, was standing near the secure glass turnstiles, clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. Her hair was completely disheveled and her face was flushed red with anger. She was loudly berating two large security guards who were physically blocking her from accessing the elevator banks. Several corporate professionals holding briefcases had stopped to watch the commotion. My mother was performing for an audience, intentionally trying to cause maximum public embarrassment to force me into compliance. She was banking on the fact that a corporate professional would do anything to avoid a public scene at their place of employment. I walked across the polished marble floor, my high heels clicking rhythmically in the cavernous room. I did not rush, and I did not look embarrassed. I approached the security desk and nodded to the head guard, letting him know I had the situation under control. My mother spotted me, and her eyes widened with a mix of fury and desperate triumph. "Allison," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high glass ceilings. "You need to tell these security guards to step aside right now. I demand to speak to your boss. I demand to speak to your human resources director immediately. You are not going to get away with this." I stood perfectly still, keeping a completely neutral expression on my face. "What exactly are you planning to tell my human resources director, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady so she would have to stop screaming just to hear me. My mother leaned across the security console, pointing a trembling finger directly at my chest. "I am going to tell them that you are committing financial abuse against your own family," she announced proudly, as if she had discovered a brilliant legal loophole. "I am going to tell them that you are mentally unstable and that you are using your corporate connections to illegally freeze your sister and her business accounts out of pure jealousy. When I explain how you are starving your own flesh and blood, they will fire you on the spot. You will lose your license and your career unless you call that bank right now and authorize the release of our funds." It was a textbook gaslighting maneuver. She had stolen my identity, committed federal wire fraud, and attempted to launder $150,000 of my credit. Yet she was standing in my corporate lobby threatening to report me for financial abuse because I refused to be her victim. She truly believed that if she threatened my professional reputation, I would instantly cave and hand over the keys to the federal escrow account. She was so entrenched in her own toxic entitlement that she completely failed to realize she was threatening a senior corporate fraud investigator in the middle of a financial district. I looked at the security guards and gave them a subtle nod indicating that it was time to end the performance. I turned my attention back to my mother, who was panting heavily, convinced she had just delivered a checkmate. Mom, human resources cannot help you bypass a federal bank freeze, I said, speaking to her as if she were a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. And the funds you are talking about do not belong to you or your son-in-law. They belong to the regional bank you tried to defraud using my social security number. Threatening my job does not change the internet protocol logs, and it does not erase the forged notary stamp on your fake power of attorney document. I raised my right hand and presented the thick manila envelope I had carried down from my office. I held it out toward her. She stared at it suspiciously, refusing to take it. "What is that?" she spat, glaring at the brown paper. "This is the only help I am ever going to give you again," I replied softly, "since you are so interested in legal definitions and corporate consequences." I printed out the official federal sentencing guidelines for you. Inside this envelope, you will find the mandatory prison terms for aggravated identity theft, federal wire fraud, and the systemic abuse of the Paycheck Protection Program. I suggest you read it very carefully. Pay special attention to the section on conspiracy to commit fraud, because it clearly outlines the penalties for anyone who assists in the crime, like a mother who provides her daughter and her stolen social security number to her son-in-law. My mother recoiled physically, stepping back from the envelope as if it were radioactive. The color completely drained from her face. Her aggressive posture collapsed, replacing her artificial bravado with raw, unadulterated fear. She finally understood that I was not bluffing. She looked around the lobby, suddenly realizing that the professionals watching her were not an audience she could manipulate, but potential witnesses to her unraveling. I placed the manila envelope on the polished marble surface of the security desk right in front of her. I turned to the head security guard. "Please escort this woman off the premises," I instructed calmly. "If she refuses to leave, or if she ever returns to this building, please bypass the building management and call the city police department to have her arrested for trespassing." The two large guards stepped forward, positioning themselves on either side of my mother. For the first time in my entire life, she had absolutely nothing to say. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She picked up the manila envelope with trembling hands, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She turned around and walked silently through the revolving glass doors flanked by security. I stood in the lobby and watched her disappear into the busy city street. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I turned around, walked back to the elevator, and pressed the button for the 22nd floor, ready to get back to my actual job. 48 hours after my mother caused a scene in my corporate lobby, I walked through the heavy revolving doors of the federal building in the downtown district. The structure was an imposing monolith of glass and concrete, perfectly reflecting the serious nature of the business conducted inside. I approached the security checkpoint, placed my briefcase on the conveyor belt, and walked through the metal detector. My personal lawyer, David, was already waiting for me near the bank of elevators. We rode up to the 14th floor in complete silence. We were directed to a sterile conference room with a long, polished oak table and bare white walls. Sitting across from us were two individuals who represented the absolute pinnacle of financial law enforcement. The first was a federal prosecutor named Thomas. The second was a special agent from the Internal Revenue Service named Agent Miller. I sat down in the leather chair, placed my briefcase on the table, and unlatched it. I pulled out the heavy black binder I had meticulously assembled over the weekend. I slid it across the smooth surface of the oak table. Thomas and Agent Miller looked at the thick binder, and then looked up at me. I explained that inside that binder was a comprehensive forensic audit detailing multiple federal felonies committed by my brother-in-law DeAndre and my mother Patricia. I outlined the 4 distinct sections of my investigation. Section 1 contained the Internet protocol logs proving identity theft and fraudulent commercial loan origination. Section 2 held the forged power of attorney complete with the fake notary stamp. Section 3 documented systemic corporate tax evasion and money laundering. Section 4 detailed $200,000 in fraudulent Paycheck Protection Program funds. Thomas opened the binder and began to read. The room remained quiet for several minutes, except for the sound of crisp paper turning. Thomas focused heavily on the first section. He looked at the internet protocol addresses and the digital timestamps. He asked me to confirm that the loan application was submitted from the residential internet network at DeAndre and his downtown loft. I confirmed it was. Thomas nodded slowly. He explained that in the eyes of the federal government, the physical location of the bank branch does not matter as much as the digital routing. Because the bank servers were located in a different state, the exact moment DeAndre clicked submit on his laptop, the fraudulent data packet traveled across state lines. Thomas stated clearly that this specific action triggered the federal wire fraud statute. Every single digital transmission associated with that loan application counted as a separate count of wire fraud, carrying a maximum penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Agent Miller from the Internal Revenue Service took over examining the third and fourth sections. His expression grew increasingly stern as he looked at the money laundering transaction maps and the fake employee payroll documents. I watched his eyes scan the yellow highlighted sections where DeAndre claimed 12 full-time employees to secure the $200,000 pandemic relief loan. Agent Miller spoke in a low, authoritative tone. He explained that defrauding the Paycheck Protection Program is considered one of the most egregious financial crimes currently being prosecuted. He noted that DeAndre did not just steal from a bank, he stole directly from the American taxpayers during a national state of emergency. Agent Miller confirmed that the Internal Revenue Service would initiate immediate asset forfeiture. Every single item DeAndre and Brittany purchased with those stolen funds, from the designer handbags to the luxury watches, would be seized to pay back the federal government. My lawyer David interjected to ensure my personal liability was completely severed. He pointed to the identity theft documentation and the hard credit freeze I had initiated. Thomas assured David that I was officially classified as a victim of synthetic identity theft and a cooperating witness. I would not be held responsible for a single dollar of the fraudulent commercial loan. The funds currently frozen in the escrow account would be reclaimed by the regional bank, and the fraudulent application would be completely wiped from my credit profile. The burden of the crime rested entirely on DeAndre, my mother, and the corrupt public notary who facilitated the forged signature. Thomas closed the heavy black binder. He looked directly at me and asked if I was prepared to testify against my own family members in a federal court. I did not hesitate. I told him I was absolutely ready. I explained that they had stopped being my family the moment they decided to use my Social Security number to fund their luxury lifestyle. Thomas nodded his approval. He turned to Agent Miller and stated that the evidence provided in the binder was more than enough to secure a grand jury indictment. The paper trail was flawless, and the hidden audio recording provided the explicit criminal intent required for a swift conviction. Thomas picked up his desk phone and called his administrative staff. He ordered them to begin drafting the federal arrest warrants for DeAndre, Patricia, and the notary. The meeting concluded after 2 hours of meticulous legal review. I shook hands with Thomas and Agent Miller, thanking them for their swift action. David and I walked out of the sterile conference room and took the elevator back down to the ground floor. When I stepped out through the revolving glass doors and onto the bustling city street, the cold morning air felt incredibly refreshing. I had just handed my toxic family over to the federal justice system. There would be no more gaslighting. There would be no more midnight ambushes or screaming matches in corporate lobbies. The emotional manipulation was officially over. The relentless wheels of the federal government were now in motion, and once those wheels begin to turn, they do not stop until justice is fully served. I hailed a taxi and headed back to my office, ready to watch the final collapse of their fake empire. It was Friday evening, exactly 4 days after my meeting with the federal prosecutor. In the criminal justice system, 4 days is usually the exact amount of time it takes for a federal judge to review a grand jury indictment and sign the official arrest warrants. But in the completely delusional world of my sister Brittany and her husband DeAndre, 4 days was apparently enough time to convince themselves that the frozen bank account was just a temporary corporate glitch. They honestly believed that if they simply acted wealthy enough, the universe would magically release the $150,000 into their account. To manifest this absurd reality, they decided to host a massive rebranding party for his fake consulting firm. They rented an ultra-premium penthouse loft in the center of the financial district for the night. I knew they did not have any cash left, so they must have used the last available balance on my mother and her highest interest rate credit card to fund the event. They hired a local catering company, a private bartender, and a professional photographer to document their fake success for social media. They were literally dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, completely unaware that the federal government was already lowering the lifeboats. I did not receive a formal invitation to the rebranding party, but I decided to attend anyway. I wore a tailored black business suit and walked past the hired security guard at the ground floor entrance by simply stating I was the primary investor. When I stepped out of the elevator and into the penthouse, the sheer volume of manufactured wealth was almost suffocating. The room was bathed in ambient purple lighting, and a local disc jockey was playing loud electronic music. Waiters carried silver trays filled with expensive champagne flutes and miniature appetizers. The guest list was entirely composed of social media influencers, reality television personalities, and a few wealthy marks that DeAndre was still actively trying to scam. My mother, Patricia, was standing near the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a glass of wine and loudly boasting to a group of strangers about her brilliant son-in-law. She had completely suppressed the memory of our encounter in my corporate lobby. In her mind, the federal sentencing guidelines I gave her were just empty threats from a jealous daughter. I walked over to the private bar, ordered a sparkling water with a lime, and turned around to observe the room. It took exactly 4 minutes for my sister Brittany to spot me. She was wearing a floor-length sequined gown that looked incredibly expensive and completely out of place for a corporate networking event. Her face dropped the moment she saw me standing by the bar. She excused herself from a group of aspiring lifestyle bloggers and marched directly toward me, her high heels clicking aggressively against the polished concrete floor. "What are you doing here, Allison?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so her guests would not hear. "You were absolutely not invited to this event. This is an exclusive launch party for high-net-worth individuals and prospective corporate clients. You need to leave right now before you completely ruin the aesthetic of the evening." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water and looked around the room. "The aesthetic, Brittany?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the illusion of success funded by our mother and her maxed-out credit cards? You are standing in a rented room surrounded by people who are only here for the free alcohol." Brittany crossed her arms, her face flushing with anger. "You are just jealous because DeAndre figured out how to bypass your little bank freeze." She sneered, leaning in close. "You thought you could stop us, but my husband is a genius. He secured temporary bridge financing from a private angel investor to float the company until the regional bank clears up that ridiculous administrative hold. You lost, Allison. Now get out of my party before I have the security guard physically remove you." Before I could even respond, DeAndre suddenly materialized beside her. He was wearing a custom-tailored velvet smoking jacket and holding a crystal tumbler of brown liquor. He looked at me with a mixture of extreme arrogance and underlying panic. "I told you not to mess with my business, Allison," he said, puffing out his chest. "You tried to play hardball, but you underestimated my network. I am surrounded by millionaires tonight. I am untouchable. You do not belong in this room. You do not fit the profile of a winner." I looked at the two of them standing there in their expensive clothes, completely consumed by their own lies. DeAndre actually believed that borrowing money from a predatory loan shark to throw a party would somehow solve his federal wire fraud problem. He was trying to project absolute dominance, but I could see the slight tremor in his hand holding the crystal glass. He knew the regional bank had not just placed an administrative hold on the funds. He knew the fraud department was investigating him. He was just desperately trying to outrun the truth by throwing a party loud enough to drown out his own anxiety. I smiled a warm, genuine smile that deeply unsettled both of them. "I am not here to ruin your aesthetic, Brittany," I said, speaking with absolute professional calm. I just wanted to come and congratulate you both in person. It takes a very special kind of confidence to host a lavish celebration while standing directly on the edge of a massive cliff. I stepped closer. Enjoy the champagne, DeAndre. I whispered quietly, so only he could hear. Because I have a very strong feeling that the catering in your near future is going to be significantly less glamorous. I took a sip of my water and turned my attention back to the dance floor, perfectly content to wait for the music to inevitably stop. The purple ambient lighting washed over the rented penthouse loft as the electronic music suddenly lowered in volume. The local disc jockey tapped his microphone, signaling that it was time for the guest of honor to speak. DeAndre walked to the center of the room, adjusting the lapels of his custom velvet smoking jacket. He held a fresh glass of champagne high in the air, a broad and incredibly arrogant smile plastered across his face. The crowd of reality television personalities and aspiring social media influencers gathered around him, holding their phones up to record the moment. My sister Brittany stood right by his side, posing perfectly for the flashing cameras. My mother Patricia stood in the front row, beaming with an expression of pure manufactured pride. I remained near the private bar, watching the spectacle unfold. This was the exact moment they had paid for, using the last of my mother and her available credit. They desperately wanted an audience to validate their fake success. I decided it was the perfect time to give that audience the absolute truth. DeAndre cleared his throat and began his speech. He talked at length about vision and the relentless pursuit of greatness. He boasted about his consulting firm and how he was revolutionizing the industry by securing massive capital injections from private investors. He spoke about the importance of family and how surrounding yourself with absolute winners builds a lasting empire. The crowd nodded along, completely mesmerized by his confident delivery. As he paused to sip his champagne, I set my sparkling water down on the bar. I walked smoothly through the crowd, making no sound against the loud chatter. Before DeAndre could resume, I stepped right up next to him. I smiled warmly and gently slipped the wireless microphone out of his hand. Completely surprised by my sudden appearance, he let go without a single struggle. The audience clapped politely, assuming I was the wealthy private investor he mentioned. I held the microphone close to my mouth. "Good evening to everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the massive speakers. "My name is Allison, and I am indeed the primary financial backer for this entire operation. I want to publicly congratulate my brother-in-law on his unique business model." DeAndre stood next to me, his chest puffed out, but I could see his eyes darting nervously. He did not know what I was going to say, but he was trapped by the cameras. I turned to look directly at the audience. "You see, DeAndre has mastered a very specific type of capital acquisition." I continued, keeping my tone bright and conversational. "He utilizes a strategy defined under Section 1343 of the United States Code. It involves an elaborate scheme to defraud a financial institution and obtaining money by false pretenses. He executes these digital transmissions across state lines using his own home wireless network." A low murmur began to ripple through the crowd. The reality television stars lowered their phones slightly, exchanging confused glances. The corporate buzzwords sounded professional, but the context was deeply alarming. DeAndre reached out to grab the microphone, but I smoothly stepped away from him, maintaining my confident posture. "But his true genius does not stop at commercial lending," I said, raising my voice slightly to command the room. "He also specialized in securing massive federal subsidies during a global crisis. He claimed 12 full-time employees who did not actually exist. He submitted fabricated payroll documents to the federal government to secure a $200,000 forgivable loan. He then invested those taxpayer funds into luxury sports cars, designer handbags, and expensive steakhouse dinners. This specific strategy is formally known as Federal Paycheck Protection Program fraud and aggravated identity theft." The murmurs in the room escalated into loud whispers. The disc jockey behind the booth looked completely bewildered, his hands hovering over his mixing board. My sister Brittany turned pale, her jaw dropping open in absolute horror. She finally realized what I was doing. I was not just ruining her aesthetic. I was reading a federal indictment out loud to her entire social network. Patricia lunged forward from the front row, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Turn that microphone off right now, Allison!" She screamed, her voice cutting through the confused chatter. "You are lying. You are a jealous, bitter woman trying to ruin this beautiful celebration." She tried to rush toward me, but two hired security guards instinctively stepped in her way, not understanding who was in charge of the event. I did not break eye contact with DeAndre. He was sweating profusely, the collar of his expensive velvet jacket suddenly looking very tight around his neck. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff waiting to hit the ground. "You thought you could steal my identity and throw a party to celebrate," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, authoritative register that echoed through the room. "You thought borrowing more money to create a fake image would stop the banking system from doing its job. The financial world does not care about your velvet jacket or your social media followers." As the tension in this penthouse reached its absolute peak, the heavy steel elevator doors at the far end of the loft chimed loudly. The sudden noise made everyone in the room turn their heads simultaneously. The heavy steel elevator doors slid open. The electronic music was abruptly cut off, plunging the room into an eerie silence broken only by the sound of heavy footsteps. A large team of men and women stepped out of the elevator. They were not wearing designer gowns or custom-tailored suits. They were wearing dark windbreakers with large, bright yellow letters printed across their backs. The letters spelled out Federal Bureau of Investigation and Internal Revenue Service. The final reckoning had officially arrived, and the party was now permanently over. The heavy steel doors of the penthouse elevator remained open, exposing the stark reality of the situation. A team of 6 federal agents walked onto the polished concrete floor. The electronic music was completely dead. The loud chatter of the party guests vanished instantly, replaced by a thick and terrifying silence. DeAndre stood frozen in the center of the room, his crystal glass of champagne slipping from his fingers and shattering against the floor. He tried to maintain his artificial composure. He forced a stiff smile and took a step toward the lead agent, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "There must be some kind of mistake, officers," DeAndre said, his voice trembling violently. "This is a private corporate event for my consulting firm. We are just wrapping up a major capital acquisition. You have the wrong address." The lead agent, a tall man with a stern face, did not smile. He reached into his dark windbreaker and pulled out a thick stack of folded papers. "We are looking for DeAndre," the agent announced, his voice booming through the silent loft. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest." The reality television personalities and social media influencers who had been recording DeAndre and his triumphant speech just moments ago immediately pivoted. They kept their cell phone cameras rolling, eager to capture the spectacular downfall of a fake millionaire. The glowing screens of dozens of devices formed a digital firing squad around him. DeAndre looked around the room, his eyes wide with absolute panic. He looked at the cameras recording his every move, knowing this footage would be on the internet in seconds. The agent stepped forward and firmly grabbed DeAndre by the arm, spinning him around. "DeAndre, you are under federal arrest for 3 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft and systemic fraud against the Federal Paycheck Protection Program," the agent stated clearly while pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed loudly in the cavernous room. His custom-tailored velvet smoking jacket bunched up awkwardly around his shoulders. He was no longer a wealthy entrepreneur. He was a federal inmate. Meanwhile, another pair of agents was already dispatched across town. I knew from my meeting with the prosecutor that Brenda, the corrupt public notary who faked the official stamp on the power of attorney, was currently being pulled out of her suburban home in handcuffs as well. The entire criminal network was being dismantled simultaneously. My mother, Patricia, could not comprehend the reality of the situation. In her mind, she was the matriarch of a successful family, and these agents were simply rude intruders, ruining her perfect evening. She pushed her way through the crowd of stunned guests and threw herself toward the lead agent. "Let him go right now," Patricia screamed, her face turning a deep shade of purple. "You have absolutely no right to arrest him. My daughter Allison is a liar and a vindictive sociopath. She is just trying to destroy this family because she is jealous of our success. I am the one who told DeAndre to use her social security number. It is my daughter. I have every right to use her financial information to help my other daughter survive." The lead agent paused and looked directly at my mother. He pulled a small digital voice recorder from his pocket and tapped a button. "Ma'am, did you just admit to providing a stolen social security number to facilitate a fraudulent commercial loan application?" he asked, his tone dangerously calm. Patricia threw her hands in the air, completely blinded by her own toxic entitlement. "It is not stolen," she shrieked at the top of her lungs. "I took it from her father and his life insurance policy 20 years ago. It is my money, and I told DeAndre to take it." The agent nodded slowly. He reached to his belt and pulled out a second pair of steel handcuffs. "Patricia, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and identity theft," he said, grabbing her wrists. My mother let out a blood-curdling scream as the cold metal locked around her hands. She had just handed the federal government a spontaneous public confession, perfectly corroborating all the forensic evidence I had submitted. I turned my attention to my sister Brittany. She was standing near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking like a ghost. Her expensive sequined gown suddenly looked cheap and ridiculous. The private bartender and the catering staff were watching her with expressions of profound pity. She looked at DeAndre being dragged toward the elevator by two agents. She looked at our mother being read her Miranda rights while sobbing hysterically and fighting against the restraints. The complete and total destruction of her influencer image was playing out in real-time, broadcast live to thousands of followers by the guests she had invited. Her knees physically buckled. She collapsed onto the polished concrete floor, burying her face in her hands. She looked up at me, her makeup completely ruined by a flood of dark tears. "Allison, please help us." Brittany choked out, her voice entirely broken. "I have nothing left. They are taking everything. Where am I supposed to go?" I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. I had spent 5 years and $250,000 trying to help her. I had sacrificed my own peace of mind to fund her illusions. But she chose to participate in my destruction instead of showing a single ounce of gratitude. "You are going to have to figure that out on your own, Brittany," I said, my voice soft but entirely devoid of warmth. "Your husband and your mother made their choices, and you happily spent the stolen money. The universe does not reward fake empires. It destroys them." I did not wait for her to respond. I turned my back on my sister, my mother, and the man who tried to steal my future. I walked smoothly through the crowd of silent guests. The partygoers parted like the Red Sea, allowing me to pass without a single word. I walked past the federal agents, who were busy documenting the scene and securing the perimeter. I stepped into the empty elevator car and pressed the button for the ground floor. The heavy steel doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of my mother screaming my name. The descent was incredibly fast and smooth. When I walked out of the luxury building and stepped into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. The city lights sparkled brilliantly against the dark sky. The heavy burden I had carried for my entire adult life had finally been lifted. I hailed a passing taxi, opened the door, and slid into the back seat. I gave the driver my address and settled into the leather cushion. I looked out the window as the financial district faded into the distance. I did not look back. I was finally free, and my completely authentic life was just beginning. 9 months have passed since that chaotic night in the downtown penthouse loft. I am currently standing on the expansive wraparound balcony of a beautiful property I purchased entirely on my own. It is a stunning top-floor condominium overlooking the harbor. The morning air is crisp and the sun is reflecting brilliantly off the gentle waves below. There is a profound and absolute stillness in my life now. It is the specific kind of peace that only arrives when you completely eradicate the noise of toxic expectations and constant manipulation. I take a slow sip of my freshly brewed coffee, and let the warmth spread deep into my chest. Looking out at the endless horizon, I cannot help but reflect on the sheer devastation my family brought upon themselves. The federal justice system moves with a deliberate and crushing weight once the gears begin to turn, and they were completely crushed under it. DeAndre never even made it to a courtroom trial. When his public defender reviewed the comprehensive forensic binder I had compiled, the internet protocol logs, the forged notary stamp, the money laundering transaction maps, and the fabricated payroll documents for the Paycheck Protection Program, he strongly advised DeAndre to accept a plea deal immediately. The evidence was completely insurmountable. DeAndre is currently serving a mandatory 5-year sentence in a medium-security federal correctional institution. In the federal prison system, there is no early release for good behavior. He will spend every single day of those 5 years sitting in a small concrete cell, entirely stripped of his custom velvet jackets, his expensive watches, and his imaginary consulting empire. His luxury sport utility vehicle was auctioned off by the government, and his corporate bank accounts were permanently seized. The arrogant man who tried to steal $150,000 from my future is now making less than $1 a day working in a prison laundry room folding identical gray uniforms. My sister Brittany and my mother Patricia faced a reality that was perhaps even harsher than federal prison because they have to live with the public humiliation of their choices every single day. As co-conspirators who actively facilitated the identity theft and financially benefited from the stolen federal funds, they were held jointly liable for the massive financial restitution. The Internal Revenue Service initiated immediate asset forfeiture. Every single designer handbag, every pair of expensive shoes, and every piece of jewelry they had purchased with stolen money was confiscated and liquidated by federal agents. They were forced to declare total catastrophic bankruptcy. Today, they are living together in a cramped, run-down motel on the extreme outskirts of the city. Because they owe hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal restitution, their wages are severely garnished. Brittany, who once proudly considered herself a high-society lifestyle influencer, now works as a cashier at a discount retail store. My mother works the overnight shift at a commercial laundry facility. Every time they receive a bi-weekly paycheck, the federal government automatically deducts the maximum allowable percentage before they even see a single dollar. They spend their days in a tiny motel room, bitterly blaming each other for their spectacular downfall. I have not spoken a single word to either of them since the night they were handcuffed. I changed my phone number and instructed my lawyer to send a strict cease and desist letter, permanently barring them from ever contacting me again. As I stand here looking at the beautiful, secure life I have built, I want to share the most valuable lesson I learned from this entire ordeal. For years, I genuinely believed that family loyalty meant sacrificing my own well-being to keep the peace. I thought that by paying their bills and absorbing their financial chaos, I was being a good daughter and a supportive sister. But true family does not demand your destruction as proof of your love. When people view your healthy boundaries as a personal insult, it is only because they have been actively benefiting from your lack of them. Financial independence is not just about having money sitting in a bank account. It is about having the absolute power to walk away from anyone who views you as a financial resource rather than a human being. We are heavily conditioned by society to forgive toxic family members simply because we happen to share the same bloodline. But sharing DNA does not give anyone the right to steal your identity, drain your life savings, or systematically manipulate your emotions. Setting hard boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate and most necessary act of self-respect. You cannot heal people who are entirely committed to their own toxicity, and you cannot save people who are determined to drag you down with them. The greatest revenge you can ever achieve is simply removing their access to your energy and building a spectacular, successful life without them. I want to pass this important question on to you. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect yourself from toxic family entitlement? How did you find the courage to cut off the financial or emotional supply to people who constantly took you for granted? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your personal experience might be the exact motivation someone else desperately needs to finally stand up for themselves today. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content about claiming your worth and establishing absolute independence. Thank you for listening, and remember that your peace of mind is the most expensive asset you will ever own. Never let anyone afford to take it from you.